The ace in the hole here is, if you have a credit card, I know one of the reasons you're using it is because you love the rewards that come with those credit cards. And, that's something that the buy now, pay later space is innovating on, but has a long way to go to be able to catch up and offer that kind of incentive.
Hey gang, it's Monday, October 11th. David and listeners, welcome to the Behind the Numbers Daily, an eMarketer podcast made possible by Newstar. I'm Marcus. Today I'm joined by David Morris, who is one of our principal analysts covering payments and commerce. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Marcus. Great to be here.
Oh, the pleasure is all ours, sir. Today's fact, before we get going, silence helps to rebuild the brain. When patients were exposed to prolonged silence, 2 hours or more at a time, brain scans revealed new cell growth in the hippocampus. In another study exploring the effects of different types of music on the brain, researchers found that the 2-minute pause between the music actually induced more relaxation than any type of music. So silence really is golden. Also, a study in the journal Heart in 2006 found that silence can relieve tension in just 2 minutes. Periods of silence throughout the day enhance sleep and lessen insomnia, which is why winding down is so important. David, you able to sneak in a couple of moments of silence in your life?
I just did. I appreciate some of the silence I was able to cultivate there. I would actually also, I think that's whoever has put that out is a wise person indeed. I think silence can be golden and, can be a very mooring experience in a hectic day. That's for sure.
Yeah. Prolonged silence, 2 hours or more. I don't know who's getting that. If you live in New York, none of this applies to you, okay? If you live in New York, you're probably thinking, what the hell does silence mean? It's something that exists if you cross the GW, okay? Anyway, today's real topic, the problem with buy now, pay later. So, David, as Patrick Kolb of Adweek explains, buy now, pay later services like Klarna, Afterpay, and Affirm have emerged as a formidable alternative to the credit card industry in recent months. Buy now, pay later is a new twist on an old idea. Big retailers have for decades offered installment plans for big ticket items like washing machines, but now buy now, pay later services are having their moment, so to speak. According to Juniper Research's Buy Now, Pay Later, the Future of E-commerce report, spending on buy now, pay later services, which are integrated within e-commerce checkout options, they'll nearly reach $1 trillion in 2026. That's up from $250 billion today, so fourfold by 2026. Dan Batum, senior editor for technology at Chain Store Age, notes that by 2026, buy now, pay later services are expected to account for over 24% of global e-commerce transactions, a quarter. E-commerce transactions for physical goods by value, today it's 9%. And Juniper also found that the number of global buy now, pay later users will exceed 1.5 billion people in 2026. That's 4 times more than we have today. But David, we're going to start with who's using buy now, pay later services, because clearly they seem to be pretty popular and only getting more so as we move into the future. Who is using these services and how? I went through some of our numbers that we have in our database and found 5 points to kind of explain who these folks are. Number one, 45 million US buy now, pay later service users today. 16% of the population, nearly 21% of people will be using buy now, pay later services next year. Number two, young people. Today, 37% of Gen Z digital buyers use buy now, pay later, 30% of millennials, 17% of Gen X, and 6% of boomers. Those numbers come from us, so it skews heavily towards young people. Number three, Afterpay, the most popular buy now, pay later service in the US, followed by PayPal in 4, and Affirm and Klarna in joint 3rd. That's from SurveyMonkey and Momentive from August 2021. 2 more points. 1, technology products. They're the items people are most likely to buy using buy now, pay later services, furniture and home goods, and then clothing. It's from that same SurveyMonkey study. And 5, consumers indicated on average they spend just over $300 using buy now, pay later. That's from the Straw Hacker Group, TSG. They surveyed over 1,500 Americans back in February. So, David, that seems to be who's using these services. What do you make of who's using buy now, pay later services and how they're using them?
Yeah, I mean, 45 million users is really an achievement in the very brief period that buy now pay later has been around in the United
Yeah.
States. And you can look at that also from the amount of money that's moving through buy now pay later solutions. And there's one way that makes it seem minuscule, 0.4% of all US retail spending, but you really need to drill down
Wow.
into the e-commerce side of things where it's 2% this year of e-commerce. And that comes out to about $20 billion on the e-commerce side. There's a little bit of in-store, but the buy now, pay later providers are also moving into being able to serve both sides of that equation.
The in-store part's really interesting. In your opinion, do you see that growing to a point where it's starting to rival, at least in share terms, the number of folks or the share of folks who are using buy now, pay later services online?
I don't. I think it's, and that goes back, I think, to, who's using it. And if,
Right.
from a growth standpoint, if we're looking at 20 to 24 billion in buy now, pay later sales in 2021, in 2 years, this is per Accenture, if you're looking at 9% of e-commerce by the end of that year, that equates to roughly $100 billion. That's another data point for you.
Wow.
Just huge growth in just 2 years. And I don't see any reason that won't happen. And I think a lot of that comes back to having mentioned Gen Z and millennials. But if we kind of unpack that a bit, let's take a look at some of the things that factor into that. You're ultimately looking at a consumer who is more debt averse. If you take a look at buy now, pay later users, it's not ironic that most of them are actually using debit cards to be able to make their loan payments. These are consumers who historically would have been quote unquote debit card users and actually still are, even though they're using buy now, pay later. And debit is something that ensures that you're not taking on any debt. You have to be able to have the money in the account to be able to buy the product. You're also looking at a consumer, and I'm speaking in broad terms, but a consumer who is, I'd call them consumers that have light credit histories.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about, I won't tell you how old I am, but if I go back to being 25 years old, I'm at a point in my life where I don't necessarily have the opportunities and the life events required for me to build a financial history in order to get some of the traditional loans, including credit cards, that would be, for which that kind of history is required. So if you're credit history light, this is an ideal option because the underwriting is very different from traditional credit card underwriting.
Yeah, an interesting stat on that point, 53 million US adults lack traditional credit scores. That was from FICO score creator Fair Isaac Corp. So a lot of people who don't have those traditional credit scores.
Exactly. And that this is something that, I think fills a real void in the market for that reason. But I think the difference too is that these are people that have light credit histories. These aren't people with bad credit. It's a matter of not having been able to establish it. And then, the digital friendly component, that really ties to the nature of these buy now, pay later programs being digital forward. If you're not a digital friendly consumer who's engaging in e-commerce, you're not going to be using this product. Now that does, there is some movement outside of e-commerce, but it's all really the growth is within the digital realm.
So we spoke about a couple of the major players already. There's Klarna, there's PayPal, there's Affirm, and others, Afterpay. But it seems as though banks, David, are trying to get into the game as well. Citigroup, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, all exploring adding installment plans on their credit cards to try and replicate what these buy now, pay later services look like, what they offer. And then Synchrony, the largest US store credit card issuer, will also launch a buy now, pay later plan this month. Do you think banks can offer a truly competitive alternative with their own BNPL buy now, pay later services?
Absolutely. Never underestimate the power of incumbents, major banks and the payment networks that are driving physical commerce and e-commerce. And, when you think about Capital One, Synchrony, MasterCard, and so forth, they've been waiting for this. This is something that they've been watching develop. They've been planning. I think the market is at a tipping point where you're just seeing an influx of these incumbents stepping in. And they're doing it, I think, very smartly. If you think about Capital One, this is a major general purpose credit card issuer, top 5 Visa, MasterCard issuer, and it's going to offer a buy now, pay later solution at the merchant point of sale. So that's an example of, an incumbent going right to the point of sale and competing directly with these quote unquote buy now, pay later upstarts, most of which I wouldn't call upstarts anymore if we're talking about Affirm and Klarna for that matter, because they've grown so quickly. But that allows them to be able to capture this same nexus of customers, and it allows them to be able to funnel those customers into its own ecosystem. So it's a complementary product, and you better believe that Capital One is looking at being able to cultivate these buy now, pay later customers, and if and when they're ready, give them a credit card. Synchrony Financial, there's a little bit of a different take on them because they actually play in historically the private label credit card space and traditional installments. These are areas that arguably could be more pressured by buy now, pay later, and that having a complementary offering is especially important for them. Lo and behold, they step in, set pay in 4 is that option, and they can do the same thing, complementing an existing line of business, providing upsell opportunity. Alliance Data, which is another big private label credit card player, has done the same thing. And then you have MasterCard. So MasterCard needs no introduction if you're in payments and if you're a consumer. One of the 2 largest payment networks by card spend volume in the US. And ultimately, what does that say? It says that this is a network that already has merchant ubiquity. You've got globally maybe roughly 80 million merchants that take MasterCard, and ultimately being able to having this productized MasterCard merchants that integrate the solution to the banks that are partnering with MasterCard to provide the loan. So there's a whole swath of issuing banks that are a part of this endeavor, and you're able to offer buy now, pay later across the network spectrum. It's fascinating.
You mentioned, MasterCard, you mentioned Capital One, bring people in, then maybe offering them credit cards. One survey suggested, SurveyMonkey and Momentive, suggesting 44% of Americans preferred buy now, pay later services over credit cards. 44% preferring them over credit cards. Just 17% said they didn't. 28% said sometimes. In your opinion, could buy now, pay later as an option be anything close to a credit card killer, if you will?
I don't think so. I just don't think so. So for one, we've covered this upsell play that the credit card issuers are moving into right now. But I think you also have to look at what they're doing within their own programs, where they're enhancing what I would call payment flexibility within their card programs. Chase, which is the largest Visa MasterCard issuer in the country, it now through My Chase plan lets credit card holders retroactively enable installment plans for purchases over $100, and it's all done digitally. It's all done in a user-friendly way. But I think ultimately the key here is that at least now, I'm overgeneralizing to make the point that the audiences for buy now, pay later and credit cards are in many ways, they're quite distinct. If you go back, you've got a lot of these buy now, pay later users would be debit card users and are debit card users. They don't skew to credit cards in the first place. And credit cards, on the other hand, are attracting consumers historically and presently with established credit histories. And then you have the ace in the hole here is, if you have a credit card, either of you, I know one of the reasons you're using it is because you love the rewards that come with those credit cards. And you love some of the additional perks and benefits that come with those credit cards. And, that's something that the buy now, pay later space is innovating on, but it has a long way to go to be able to catch up and offer that kind of incentive. Because at the end of the day, the argument that is won in the US is that if you reward customers, consumers for using their cards, you're going to engage them and you're going to grow credit card volume. And that's why the US is so far ahead of other international markets in terms of credit card spend, because they've done an extraordinary job doing just that.
47% of users choose buy now, pay later services to avoid credit card interest, according to the Strawhecker Group. 31% simply enjoy the flexibility offered by delaying payment for a purchase. But to your point about them, killing credit cards, knocking off credit cards, using buy now, pay later services because they were an alternative to credit cards was the 5th most likely reason that Americans used these types of services from SurveyMonkey and Momentive. The number one reason people use BNPL was because they couldn't pay in full. So it wasn't because they were trying to replace their credit cards, to your point, David. Let's talk a bit about the alleged danger of BNPL. So the buy now, pay later trend could be the next hidden source of consumer debt. Analysts warn. That was an article written by Waizen Tan of CNBC. What does she mean? Well, BNPL companies say they rely less on, and in some cases bypass altogether, traditional credit scores and reports, as we mentioned a bit earlier on. This lets them approve more consumers, and shoppers gain the ability to buy things even without cash on hand, translating into higher sales for retailers, notes Anna Maria Andriotis of the Wall Street Journal. So, David, in your opinion, how much of a legitimate problem could the idea of BNPL services be with regards to them being the next hidden source of consumer debt down the road?
I think there's a potential problem there, and there's a couple ways to go at that. I think on the one hand, you can argue, and I think is a good argument, that buy now, pay later is safer in many ways. If you take a look at the amounts that are approved, they're smaller than, the average credit card spending limit. These transactions are approved on a per transaction basis. I think that a lot of the consumers that are utilizing buy now, pay later do in fact utilize it as a budgeting tool. But ultimately, you have to take a look at a couple of things. One, a lot of the buy now, pay later providers, they don't report to the credit card agencies. Now, that isn't necessarily a problem unless you kind of step back and recognize that lenders may not know how many buy now, pay later loans have actually been extended. They may not know how many buy now, pay later loans a prospect may have with another buy now, pay later player, and that opens the door to the possibility that what's to stop consumers from cross-shopping loans to a degree that overextends them. I'm not saying that is in fact happening. I'm saying that I think it's an open question. And I think ultimately you're looking at a market that, like many nascent markets, grows very quickly, and regulation is always a couple of years or more behind. And as this market, becomes larger and larger, it will invariably attract more regulatory scrutiny. And it's really around that opacity that I think they'll focus, and ensuring that because these are loans, that they are treated from a regulatory perspective like loans, and that consumers are given the same kind of disclosure agreements and other kinds of things that they'd be given for a regular installment loan or a credit card.
Two things that jumped out to me, potential considerations here. One came from ratings agency Fitch, noting that BNPL users may find themselves unable to afford the periodic repayments, just talking about, and may turn to credit cards or other forms of high interest debt to repay those BNPL debts. According to Fitch, findings by the Australian Securities and Investment Commission in November showed 15% of Australian consumers using such pay later schemes had to take out an additional loan in the previous year to pay off their BNPL plan on time. So they had to take out more credit to pay off that BNPL credit, if you will. And the second thing here, Gartner e-commerce analyst Ant Duffin thinks that beyond the direct liability of regulations, there also is a potential PR risk for retailers if they eventually come to be associated with a product contributing to inflated consumer debt, which was already pretty high. It does seem, though, David, based on a bunch of these stats, I'm curious your take on them. This is how we'll close out the lead. It does seem as though BNPL could be a potential source of consumer debt, and that could appear very real. Number one, people spend more with these services, it seems. Their value may be lower, but it seems like they're spending more as a result. First of all, about half of folks are willing to pay between 10 to 20% more on items through BNPL than they would a conventional credit card or debit card. That's from Gartner. 39% spend more. 16% of people spend much more when using BNPL services. That's from the Strawhecker Group. The average ticket price increases with BNPL. Nearly 70% of shoppers saying they would spend more. Nearly 60% said they would increase spend by at least 10%. That's from MasterCard. And consumers using BNPL services placed orders that were 18% larger versus the same day period in 2020. That's from Adobe. So all those figures pointing to consumers spending more. You also have people buying outside of their budget, which people do with credit cards, but a similar type of behavior. Why do folks choose BNPL options? 46% said they wanted to buy something outside of their budget. That's from the Strawhecker Group. And the number one reason Americans used BNPL services that I mentioned earlier was because they couldn't afford to pay something in full. They also seem to have a kind of lessened perceived risk of debt. Finder research found that 41% of Brits who are increasingly using BNPL cited the ability to spread the cost of payment over time as a key factor. 30% claimed to use it to pay for purchases they couldn't otherwise afford. That was from Finder.com. Georgia Rosa Johnson wrote that. And finally, David, 42% of Gen Z, 69% of millennial shoppers are more likely to purchase items, more likely to pull the trigger in the first place if a BNPL service is offered. That's from Afterpay. So more likely to pull the trigger, a lessened perceived risk of debt, buying outside their budget, and people spending more. Your thoughts on some of that data, which could point to this being a potential source of consumer debt?
Yeah, I think you hit the crux of what buy now, pay later can do for merchants, ultimately to be able to increase conversion rates and to increase basket size. That is music to any merchant's ears. And it is why merchants are very keen to be able to partner with buy now, pay later solutions, especially when retail is just so unbelievably competitive.
Yeah.
And I think I would want to say that I think there are a lot of, really the innovation behind buy now, pay later. There's a great deal of positives for it that I think can accrue to the consumer. I mean, there is an immediacy and a transparency to it. It's very simple. And, I think by the same token, the statistic that you're referring to, they can't be ignored. And they raise questions that I think will require more investigation by regulatory bodies. It's not as if the buy now, pay later industry is doing anything necessarily nefarious. It's a matter of being able to suss some of these questions out and find out more about them and ensure that there are breakers. I would expect that buy now, pay later would continue a very strong growth trajectory. I think the fact that incumbents are jumping in as they are, it's not only to thwart a competitive threat and ensure that buy now, pay later is not just going to siphon away future customers. It legitimizes the model to a degree. I think also having these incumbents step in may actually reduce some of the pain points that we've discussed here, because they already have different kinds of underwriting. MasterCard has tremendous expertise in fraud, for instance. Issuers have tremendous expertise in traditional underwriting that may foreclose some of the issues that we're actually bringing up from occurring.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's all we've got time for the first half of the show. It's time now for the halftime report, where we summarize the key takeaways from the lead story in just 20 seconds or less. David, I'll ask you for your main takeaway from everything we've talked about from the first half.
Buy now, pay later is positioned for continued strong growth. The influx of incumbents only will push that forward. I think by the same token, it may rein in just a little bit through competition and through the possibility of regulatory oversight some of the growth in the buy now, pay later players that ultimately created the space.
That's all we've got time for the lead story. Time now for In Other News. But first, we say goodbye to David, who's just joining us for the first half of the show today. David, thank you so much for hanging out.
Great to be here. I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir. And now, a quick word from our sponsor, Newstar. Are you prepared for marketing's next chapter? You won't want to miss Brave New World's 2021, the virtual marketing and analytics event of the year. On November 9th and 10th, join Brave New Worlds to learn how you can adapt to the forces redefining advertising. It's free, and you'll hear from today's top minds in marketing, data, and analytics, including executives from Facebook, General Motors, Capgemini, Publicis, and more. Go to bravenewworlds.newstar to register today. All right, folks, we are back. Before we start in other news, let's introduce the chap who's joining us for this segment. We have Andrew Lipsman joining us here as one of our principal analysts covering retail.
Hey, Marcus.
Hey, buddy. Thanks so much for hanging out for the second half. Today in other news, tech-fueled dressing rooms, early Black Friday deals, and some advertising secrets. Story 1, Amazon's planned department stores will aim to boost its apparel sales by offering shoppers a chance to try on clothes from its own private label brands in tech-fueled dressing rooms, writes Sebastian Herrera and Khadija Safdar of the Wall Street Journal. So Amazon's got some department stores that it's working on, and apparently it's going to have some technology that's going to pump into its dressing rooms to make them more appealing. What kind of features are we talking about here? Well, two jump out to me, Andrew. One, customers can scan QR codes of items they want to try on, and associates of the store will put the items in the fitting room. So you just show up at the fitting room number 1 and all your stuff's there that you've scanned throughout your shopping journey. And number 2, customers can then ask for more items using a touch screen whilst they're in the fitting room, which could recommend additional clothing based on the pieces the shoppers liked. The first department stores Amazon's working on are expected to open near San Francisco and Columbus, Ohio. Andrew, how much does this move the needle for in-store shoppers, in your opinion?
I think it's very experimental right now. All of Amazon's in-store experiences, it's great to get some additional detail here because there's a lot of speculation on what this whole experience might look like. The interesting detail to me is this idea of taking friction out of the shopping process in store, using QR codes and having items brought to you. So, Amazon is really best in class when it comes to convenience and frictionless experiences. So it's interesting to see this experimented with in the apparel category because you don't think of that as being a high friction category. But if it works, it works. Maybe it works well, particularly for the type of apparel that Amazon focuses on.
Yeah, we've seen Amazon use technology to reimagine the store for a while. Cashierless Go technology, which it rolled out a number of years ago. Andrew, you just threw a story at me recently, which is regarding Amazon supposedly working on a new fridge.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, right? We've seen them do this in appliances in the past. Can you take frictionlessness too far? I think the fridge might be that. I want to know more details about this one for sure.
Yeah.
But to me, this is where it's like, is this a solution in search of a problem? Because if it relies on sensor technology like they use in the Amazon Go store for, let's say, when your milk runs too low, that's the kind of classic example you talk about. I don't know if I want to put my milk in the same place every time. I don't know if I want to have my refrigerator be so rigid in terms of where I put things. So I have questions about the technology and whether or not there would be flexibility. It just doesn't seem like the most pressing problem. But you know what? Consumers do like frictionlessness. So as long as Amazon looks at these things as experiments, which they do, then I think they tend to invest in the ones that are actually going to solve problems for customers.
Yeah, and you don't always need an immediate replenishment. You might want to wait a little while. So because if it just orders the thing again, maybe you didn't need as much as you did when you first bought the item, and so it's going to go bad. So stuff to work out there. Story 2. Andrew, this story again about Amazon, and it was one that you flagged, something about Amazon working on some early or rolling out some early Black Friday deals. Tell us what's going on here and why it matters.
Yeah, so a big looming question that I've been thinking about a lot with the holiday season upon us now, or coming very soon, is what was going to happen with Amazon Prime Day in October. We had that last year. Would it happen again this year, especially given that they went back to holding the event in midsummer? So the answer now looks to be a no, but they're still going to fill that void with other promotions. So Black Friday deals already rolling out here in October. They also have their holiday beauty haul to maybe get more traction in the beauty category. And then at the end of October, they're going to be releasing their Fire TV Omni series. So a lot of other things happening to fill the void. My biggest question really is, without a specific tentpole that everybody rallies around industry-wide, does it have as big of an effect as they might hope for?
Yeah. Story 3, Lisa Lacey of Adweek highlights 5 advertising secrets that Neil Lindsay, SVP of Worldwide Prime and Marketing at Amazon, recently shared with Adweek agency's editor, Jameson Fleming, at Brand Week 2021. So what did this SVP of Worldwide Prime and Marketing at Amazon talk about? 5 things. 1, in terms of advertising secrets. 1, he said that they show how customers can't live without Prime because it makes their lives better. For example, same-day delivery of essential items that you can't go without. Number 2, you don't really have to sell, he says. Sometimes it's just better to support your customers and then they'll buy things from you because you were supportive. Number 3, when advertising, Amazon often draws attention to a product. For their Super Bowl spots, they've chosen Alexa, which is the smart speaker virtual assistant, and they picked her because she intends to make people's lives better. Number 4, Amazon works with multiple agencies because ideas can come from anywhere. And number 5, only spend money on advertising when it helps customers find the next product or service they might find useful. That makes their life easier, better, or more fun. So Andrew is talking about making people's lives better, not really having to sell, drawing attention to a product when you advertise, using multiple agencies, and only spending on advertising when you're trying to point the customer to a product or service, your takeaways from this list?
Yeah, one of the interesting dynamics, I think, is the talk of dramatizing the benefits. And really, the way that they talk about it is about humanizing the brand. And I think that's just an important aspect for a brand that often can be all about efficiency, frictionlessness. Maybe it's a bit utilitarian. Tying it to the benefits and how they want to be improving consumers' lives, I think, is important. The other interesting takeaway, and this maybe hews a little bit more closely to Amazon's ethos, was a quote that Lindsay said, we have a mental model here, which is that for a campaign to be successful, it really should achieve what we think of as the trifecta. And that is, it not only has to be efficient and pay for itself and drive a business result, but it should also help us see customers engage in whatever is being advertised. The part of that was interesting to me is that it has to not only be efficient and pay for itself. I think that's actually a great takeaway for marketing, because not all marketing and advertising can be measured very well. But for what can be measured, it's a good baseline to say, let's cover our costs, let's pay for itself. And then we should understand that there are all these kind of human and emotional aspects that we want to try and drive that engagement and measure it if we can, but it may not be perfectly measurable. So I think that's just a good way for any marketer to look at how to advertise.
That's what we've got time for. Thank you so much to my guests. Thank you to Andrew.
Thanks, Marcus.
Thank you so much to David, who joined us for the first half of the show. Thanks to Victoria. She edits the show. And thanks to everyone listening. Tomorrow, Tuesday, October 12th, you can check out one of our Tech Talk webinars with Salesforce. They're going to be talking about 5 B2B marketing takeaways to inform your 2022 marketing plans. See you guys tomorrow for the Behind the Numbers Daily, the eMarketer podcast made possible by Newstar.